All right. So, I think we're live. I think it's working. Sorry, we had a couple of tech issues, so we're a little bit behind. But if you haven't heard already, we have a special stream tonight, something that's a little bit different than what we're normally used to. Um, we actually have a viewer who's been around our channel for a while, and he's got a really good story. He's got a great testimony of how God has worked in his life, and I wanted to bring him on. I want him to share it because I think it could be really helpful for a lot of other people to hear. I want to get the story out there. Um, I know him as Lycan, so I'm gonna keep calling him that, even though his name in chat is a little bit different than that now. He's Zev the Satyr. So speaking of, do you want to introduce yourself just a little bit for everybody?
Sure. Um, so you might know me as different things depending on who you are, but until yesterday, my username was Secret Lycan, but now it's ZevTheSatyr's. Just because I feel more identity with that name, and I didn't really like my reasoning behind becoming Secret Lycan. So here we are. I am also known as Logan's favorite viewer, in
Obviously.
case anyone was wondering. Um, and Bert loves me. He just doesn't know it yet.
Hmm. Sweet. Anything else you want to say about yourself before we get into it?
I don't think so. I mean, it's all pretty much about me. So,
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, you've got a great story, so I'm ready to hear it. I think everybody else is too.
all right. So this is totally the first time that we're doing this. Hasn't happened before.
Absolutely.
Definitely not. Um, but I wanted to start it with Jeremiah 29:11, which is one of those verses that everyone knows. So you probably heard it before. But it goes, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." And I think it's important when we talk about testimonies to think about, well, A, to think about everything happens for a reason. Everything that happens in your life um, is either because you made a choice against what God's plan was, or that God allowed it to happen because he knew how he was going to use that in the future. And it's also important to remember that your testimony, while it's your story, it's not a story of what you did, it's a story of what God did.
Mhm. Absolutely. Amen.
But essentially, I was born in Georgia. I lived there until I was 7, and I ended up moving to Alabama after that. And the whole time, most of the time I was in Alabama, I was super homesick. Um, a lot of my family was in Georgia except for like my immediate family, and I always wanted to go back. But throughout my time in Alabama, I'd been like struggling with my sexuality and like figuring out who myself was. Um, I wouldn't say I was always struggling with it because sometimes at certain points I struggled with it. At certain points, I was content in who I was. It just kind of depended. But I jumped around to a few different churches. When I lived in Alabama the first time, I went to 3 different churches. 2 of them were super small, and one of them was probably constituted as a mega church. Um, the first two I was more active in. The big church I only went to a couple times and I didn't really enjoy it. But the first two with the smaller congregations, I went to it for a while. I would say they're more Pentecostal leaning. And then the big church I went to was more of a Baptist church. So I kind of went to an array of different churches,
Hmm.
but I never had a relationship with God. I had a relationship with the church. I was going there to be around the people, not to be around God. I didn't really know who God was. I didn't care to know who God was. I didn't even really pay attention during the sermons. I was just there to hang out until the service was over, and then I could interact with other people. And then the same happened after I ended up graduating. I went to college and got involved with the campus ministries. And when I went to the campus ministry, I never even really went to service with them. I just kind of went to the different events they were doing. Like one time we did a murder mystery night, and I was the only person who solved it. And they gave me Clue as a prize, so I'm pretty much a professional detective. So if you ever need a private detective, let me know. It's 1,000 an hour. Okay, I might be dumb, but I ain't cheap.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I ended up dropping out of college because it wasn't really I didn't have the passion for knowledge that I have gotten in my later years, which feels weird saying because I'm not that old. But when I was 18, I didn't really have that passion to learn anything. I just kind of wanted to do life.
Hmm.
But when I was 19, my parents ended up moving back to Georgia, and at that point, I had established myself at work. I had groups of friends that I really enjoyed being around, and I didn't want to change anything, so I ended up moving out, and I got an apartment. And I lived in that apartment with a couple people I worked with at the time. Um, and they were like they just like drink and did drugs and all of this all the time. And like I didn't really enjoy any of that, but like I wanted to seem cool, so like I hung out around it, but I never really did any of it because I didn't enjoy doing it.
Hmm.
But there were a lot of bad things that were happening in that time. Um they were obviously just hanging out and fueling their addictions and inviting people over that I had specifically asked for them to not invite over and different things like that. Like it was not a good time in my life. I was miserable. And one night one of my roommates was on something. I don't know what he was on, but he was on something and he was playing with a gun and I was asleep in my bedroom and at that point I kept like my doors locked because I didn't want them like being around me, didn't trust them. So if I was home, my doors were locked. So he ended up shooting his gun across the apartment. And I had opened that morning and I was asleep in my bed. And the gunshot did not wake me up. I don't know how it didn't wake me up, but it didn't wake me up.
Wow.
But I woke up to banging on my door. And he was like yelling and just banging on my door. So I'm still like half asleep. I walk over and I open my door. And he goes, like, "Are you okay?" Like, he's, like, freaking out, and he runs past me, and I turn around, and, like, 3 foot above my bed, there's a big hole in the wall,
Wow.
and I'm still, like, half asleep, so I just look at him, and he explains to me what happened, and I'm like, "Absolutely not. Like, this is the like, you've been doing a lot of things that are not okay, but this is the last straw of not okay."
Hmm.
So, I ended up calling my sister, and at that point, my middle sister had moved back to Georgia and both of my parents did, but my oldest sister lived about half a mile away from me. So I called her and I was like freaking out and I was like, this is what happened. And she was like, absolutely not. She was like, come over. So I went over to her house and she was like, you're not going back there. You're moving in here. So that night while my roommates were at work, um, my ex brother in law and I drove over there. We packed all of my stuff and moved myself into their house.
Hmm.
So I lived with them for a few months. And that was when I found out that my brother in law at the time was abusive. And my sister had just given birth to her oldest kid. So I'm living there with a baby my sister and her husband who's abusing her.
Mm.
So overall, it was just not a great time. And I wanted to move back with my parents, even though I didn't want to move to Georgia. I wanted to move back with my parents because I was like, this is not a good situation to be in.
Yeah, so just one bad house situation to another one.
Right. So, but I didn't move back in with my parents because I felt guilty to do that because I didn't want to leave my sister with him because I didn't know if things would get worse if I wasn't there.
Yeah.
So I lived with them for a while and eventually, um, so short story about that. I thought that an oil change was the same thing as um, putting oil in your car. So I was like, oh, as long as I have oil, I don't need an oil change. I'm like, I'm beating the system because I am saving so much money. So I was driving to work one day and I just hear an explosion. And all of a sudden, my car stops in the middle of the interstate and there is white smoke everywhere.
Hmm.
My engine exploded
Mhm.
because I hadn't had an oil change in like 15,000 miles or however far it had been. I don't even know. It, so at this point, I'm in a I don't have anywhere to live. I'm living with my sister. I don't have a car. Not a great, like a bad situation went to an awful situation.
Yeah.
So, um, eventually, like I'd been talking with my mom about it, and she was like, "You need to just come back." So I ended up moving back in with them. They fronted the money for a car. I paid them back for it, but they fronted the money so that I had a vehicle to get to work. And I ended up um, living with them for 7 years because I was waiting for like the right time to move back to Alabama. The whole time I lived with them, I was like, I'm going back to Alabama, but I was
Mhm.
waiting for like that perfect time. And for the record, perfect time doesn't exist.
Mhm.
That's not a real thing. But as I lived with them, like I'd always struggled with depression, but it got a lot worse when I was living with them. Like the situation I was in was great, best situation I'd been in years. But I didn't want to be in Georgia. I wanted to be in Alabama. So like I was really like that was like the main like this is what you're struggling with between that and my sexuality too, obviously. And I just miss like having a community. Like I didn't really have a core group of people anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously community is something very important. When God made Eve, it was because it wasn't right for Adam to be alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not meant to be alone. We're not meant to do life alone. But and then part of the issue with that was I wasn't trying to build community because I was like, oh, I'm not staying here. I am temporarily here until I move back to Alabama. So why build connections? Why get to know people? Um, because I was walking in like, I don't like these people because these people are in Georgia. So I
Mhm.
don't like them. They're bad people,
Hmm.
which obviously isn't true. There's good and bad people everywhere. But that was my mindset because I didn't want to be there. So everything that was there was bad in my mind.
Yeah.
But I lived there for a while. I ended up going back to school. And when I went back to school, things got better. And like I was happy with the position I was in. I was happy with how things were going. But I ended up leaving school again just due to money at that point. School's expensive. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's
Oh,
expensive.
absolutely.
But so I ended up leaving school again and I went back to church again at some point after um, I stopped going to school, because after I stopped going to school, things got really bad again because I didn't have that core community.
Mm-hmm.
Because while I was in school, like I had like the core people that I would be around all the time. I was super active in school. I was in SGA and in several clubs. I had like core people that I would be around. But and when I went back to church, I actually had the opposite issue because, like I said, when I was in church before, like I'd built a relationship with the church, but I didn't know God. And this time I went to, you could call the church I went to there as a mega church too. Probably a couple thousand people went there. It was a big church. But I went there and I was building a relationship with God, but I didn't have a relationship with people.
Mm-hmm. So opposite problem this time.
Right. And so eventually, like, I just stopped going because it's like, why am I here? What's the point? Like, I don't know anyone here. I'm not going to any events. I wasn't talking to people besides like and meet and greet before the service started was the only interaction I had with people there.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually it just became not important. I had other things to do, so I just didn't go. And I never really like built that strong relationship with God. And part of that was because I didn't know what that looked like. Like, because I wasn't interacting with people there, I didn't know the model of what a relationship with God looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So after I left there, rinse, wash, repeat, start to get super depressed again. And then in 2019, oh, wow, it's been 4 years. But in 2019, I made an attempt on my life and I ended up getting put in a psych ward for um, when you do that. Um, I don't know about state to state, I'm sure it's different. But in Georgia, when you do that, there's a mandatory hold for 3 days. So I went to the ER and then they sent me to a mental hospital and I was held there for 3 days. And honestly, it was good because like I got the help I needed. I went through therapy, I got on medicine, and I was able to get myself out of that place. But at the same time, like I don't know if you know anything about mental hospitals, but they're not great places because you have like all kinds of mental illnesses who are a lot cooped up in the same building. And like, there's people in there who are battling drug addiction and people in there who are battling depression, but there's also people in there who have like, not to say that addiction and depression aren't major issues, but there's people also in there who have like major issues so it's kind of terrifying. Like at one point, this guy ended up freaking out and they had to call some kind of code. Literally everyone who was in staff in the building had to run into the ward I was in. And they put us all in one room and they had a human shield, a human wall in between us and this guy because this guy was like going, I want to say that. This guy was very off the wall. And it ended up taking like he got in like a wrestling match with some of the doctors before they were able to tranquilize him because he was going to be a danger to everyone else there. Um, but I ended up getting out of there, and things were okay for a while, but not great. Um, but I kept on waiting for that perfect time to go back to Alabama. And at one point, I was talking to one of the girls I worked with, and she was like, she's in probably her mid 40s. Um, but she was like, honestly, there's not a right time to do things. There's not a perfect time to do things. And like I trusted her impact on that because she had grown up in England. She moved to Alabama to be with I mean, moved to Georgia to be with her husband, but she knew no one out here. She just came out here with nothing, knowing nobody. And I was like, well, if you're able to do that and you're telling me that like there's not a perfect time, I just have to do this. Like I can't wait anymore. I have to just go through and do this. So I cracked down and I paid off some medical bills, paid off my car, all of that. And I was like, okay, I'm moving. So I saved up enough money for an apartment and I ended up moving back to Alabama. And things were great. Like better than they've ever been. But it was temporary because like I was chasing after idols. I wasn't chasing after God. And we're all trying to like fill that hole of what we're missing in our soul. But the only thing you can fill that hole is God. If you try and fill it with other things, it's not gonna last. But so things were fantastic for a while, and then they weren't good anymore. And then I started to like fall back into like that depression again. And I ended up getting offered a different position at work. I was at the time I was a supervisor over a customer service department, which was a lot of headache. Um, and then everyone's always mad at you when you're a supervisor over a customer service department because the customers are mad at you because you can't give them what you want. Your team's mad at you because you have to hold them accountable. And your management's mad at you because you have to pick your battles with the team or they're all going to hate you. So there's not really like a middle ground to make everyone not hate you. They're just all going to hate you all the time. But I was offered a position to do like all of the pricing and scanning and all of that, and I ended up accepting that position. And one of the things that that position gave me, and was the key reason that I took it, was a set schedule. So I work mornings all the time now instead of fluctuating shifts throughout the week. And I have set days off every week. And one of the set days off I got was Sunday. So I was like, my life's always been better when I've been part of a church. So I'm gonna figure out what the church looks like. Like I'm gonna see what that looks like. So in June of last year, I took this position. I started this job June 1st of last year. So I started reaching out. I went to this mega church, the one that I went to the first time I lived out here and I didn't like. I don't know why that's the church I picked, but that's the church I picked. Um, the main reason was I wanted to be invisible. I didn't want people to see me. I wanted just to be able to go in and no one notice me. But I didn't want to like jump into the church. So I reached out to small groups and I ended up reaching out to 4 different small groups at this church. And out of the 4 small groups I reached out to, not a single small group leader responded to me. So I'm like, okay. And a few weeks later, the guy in charge of small groups at that church reached out to me and he was like, hey, like, hope you're good. Have you picked a small group? Like, how's the small groups going? And I'm like, well, I haven't heard from anyone, so I haven't gone to a group because I have no information about them besides like the basic info they do in the posting online. And he was like, okay, I'll figure it out for you. And he was like, let me reach out to them and I'll reach back out to you. So he forwards out emails to the leaders that I'd reached out to. And he forwarded out emails to them and was like, hey, he's looking for a small group. How can we get him involved? And still, not a single one of them responded to me. So a couple weeks after that, a week or two, I don't remember the exact timeline, he reached out to me again and was like, hey, did anyone reach out to you? And I'm like, no. But I was like, it's fine, don't worry about it. Like, I'll just go to a different church. And he never responded to me after that. I don't really fault him because, like, I'm sure, like, it hurt for someone to be like, I don't want to be part of your community because this is going on. Like, I'm sure that's hard. So I understand why he didn't respond. And at that point, I'd already decided not to go to that church. So what's the point in responding to me? So I ended up reaching out to a different church, and I'd explicitly not reached out to this church because the church is one of the top 10 largest congregations in the country. And that just, it has a lot going on. And that scared me. So I reached out to small group with them, and I ended up joining that small group, and I was part of that small group for a couple months. And I never felt like super included by the small group. I didn't feel like I belonged with them, but I had a community, even though they didn't really care that I was there. I had a community. So I started going to one of the locations of the church. And like a month or two after that, like I was just tired of not feeling like I belonged in that small group. And I hadn't really met a lot of people at the church. So I reached out to another small group. And I didn't know at the time, but the leader of the small group is the facilities director at one of our campuses. So I ended up going to the small group, and I was like, this guy is really cute, super sweet. I like him. So I ended up falling in love with this guy. It was a lot of fun. And I felt seen in that small group. I felt heard in that small group. So, and then I ended up we do a serve day every year, and I ended up doing serve day with him. Um, it was just, and some other people from the church, but we were the only ones from the small group. But we were also the only people in the small group, so that factored into it. And then over time, a couple other people joined the small group, um, and I was just struggling. And like he could tell every week that like I was struggling. So eventually, we were talking outside of the coffee house we were meeting at, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And I just lose it, and I'm in the parking lot of this coffee shop just bawling. And I explained to him that I had feelings for someone, and like it was hard because it wasn't someone I was supposed to have feelings for, and I didn't know how to navigate that. And he said, "Am I the person you have feelings for?" And I was like, "Yes." So he was like, "I don't know what you're going through." He helped me through a lot, but he was like, "I don't know what you're going through." So he introduced me with someone else at the church who had similar struggles to me. And to see that like there was someone else there that dealt with that, it made me feel a lot more like I belonged at the church because he belonged at the church. I felt like I belonged at the church too.
Yeah.
So that facilities director, I ended up going to his campus, and I was like, I'm gonna impress this guy. Like I'm gonna make him love me. So I ended up going to his campus, and I was like, I'm gonna impress him by like diving into God. Like I'm gonna jump in head first. I started praying every day, reading my Bible every day, watching Christian content. Like it became like a foundation of my life. And through that, I was like, okay, like maybe I'm not really in love with this guy. Maybe I'm in love with the attention he's giving me. Maybe I'm in love with the fact that I feel seen by him. And I'm like, but whatever it is, I know how I feel isn't biblical. And I know it's not what was meant for me. And that's not to say everything was perfect after that. That's just to say I was starting to think, hey, I need to put God first because that's the only way I'm going to be okay. Um, but I was still struggling with depression a lot. I was still struggling with not wanting to end my life. Um, him and I had several conversations after church in the parking lot at night, of him talking me off the cliff. And one of them stands out the most to me because I was talking about how I couldn't stay alive for myself. Like I wasn't worth staying alive for. And he looked at me and he was like, I don't like what I'm about to say. I hate the fact I'm about to say this. But he said, if you can't stay alive for yourself, stay alive for me. And that at that point, it was easier when I was struggling because I'm like, I'm not doing it for myself anymore. I'm doing it for him and I love him. So if it's going to hurt him, I can't do this. That would hurt him. Um, so we went through that for a while. Still wasn't in a great place, but I was staying alive for him. And eventually, after that conversation happened, we had decided to distance our friendship, and we're still friends now, and our friendship has grown. But at that point, we decided to distance ourselves from each other. And like, we weren't going to hang out. We weren't going to like have phone calls. Like, we were going to interact, but it was going to be minimal to limit the temptation for me. So we ended up doing that, but I was not okay with it because I wanted to be around him 24/7. Like, I wanted the second I woke up until the second I went to sleep, I wanted to be with him. So I got to the point where I was like, well, if I can't be around him, if we're not going to be best friends, then there's no point in me being alive. There's no point in me being alive without him. So I started struggling really hard with it. And one night, um, we were leaving the church and he had to go and do something really quick. And we were leaving, but he could tell I was not okay. And I'd said something to him, and he was like, we need to have a conversation about this, but I will be right back. But when I come back, we are having a conversation. So he walked back in the building, and I went, and there's like a sidewalk leading away from our building into the parking lot. And there's like pillars, not pillars, because they don't go all the way to anything, but there's big, like, square brick stacks that go along the sidewalk. So I went and hid behind one of them because I didn't want to talk to him. So he can't find me, so he leaves. And then I'm sitting behind that brick pillar. I'm just crying because I was scared to leave because I was like, if I leave, I'm not going to make it home. And then um, the person in charge of our dream team, which is what my church calls our volunteer team, and the production director walked out of the building together. And they were the two people on the lead team, besides the person I was in love with, who isn't helpful, that I'd built the most connection with. And they just happened to walk past me, and they happened to see me on the ground crying. So they turned around and like walked over to me, and we ended up having like a 2-hour conversation. And they would not leave until I promised that I wouldn't do anything
Mm-hmm.
to hurt myself. And through that conversation, I hadn't really talked about sexuality with any of them. And I was like jumping around the subject, but I was like, there's someone that I have feelings for. There's someone I have feelings for. And then I go, there is someone on the lead team that I have feelings for. And the dream team director went, can I make this easy for you? And I was like, sure. And he goes, it's a guy you have feelings for. And like, it felt like I'd been like punched in the gut. And I was like, yeah, it is. And I was waiting to be like excommunicated. I was waiting to be like attacked, berated, but none of that happened. He was like, "See, that wasn't that hard," and like he never talked about what the Bible says about sexuality. He never talked about any of that. Because we were on the same page of that. I knew I wasn't supposed to feel how I was feeling, and him attacking me for it was not going to benefit anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and through our conversation, one of the points that I made was my sin. Well, I talked about how I didn't belong in the church. And the production director chimed in and he was like, why do you feel that way? And I was like, because my sin is worse than the sin a lot of the church struggles with. Because when you think about sins the church struggles with, like you think pride, you think gluttony, you think like slothfulness. And I'm like, these things aren't as bad as homosexuality. And they talked about how, in the Bible, it talks about how God views all sin as equal. Sin is sin is sin. It doesn't matter what sin it is. And my production director was really hitting that point home, and I'm like, nope, it's different. And he goes, I'm fat. And I'm like, well, that's not a sin. And he was like, yeah, it is, because it's slothfulness. Like, I'm not working out like I'm supposed to. I'm not eating like I'm supposed to. And I kept on making the argument that my sin was worse, and he wouldn't, he kept on fighting me on it. And at this point, I felt called to God, but I didn't have a relationship with God at that point. But we ended up leaving eventually, and I ended up, after that conversation, I decided that I wanted to be more involved in the church. So I ended up applying for a part-time job at the church. I ended up getting that job, and then I ended up going through the membership program and started serving. And I started serving with the students team, and I enjoyed working with the students team, but I didn't feel like I was appreciated on the students team. So I was struggling with that serve specifically. And I was just really struggling with it. I was like, I want to be here. I enjoy what I'm doing, but I feel like I'm not being utilized because I was put in a lower level position. I felt like I wasn't really doing anything. And I eventually found out that they'd put me in that position specifically because I didn't have a lot of, I was still young in my faith. I'm still young in my faith. But the facilities director told me he had went to our students pastor, and they had a conversation about me, and they had decided that they wanted to put me in a low level position just to kind of get my feet wet, which didn't really bother me, but that's not how it was explained to me. I was told that they didn't have a group leader position open, so they didn't have anywhere to put me. And the fact that I was lied to about it kind of bothered me. So it really made me not feel like I was wanted. So I ended up um, just serving there for a while. And then the production intern eventually came up to me and he was like, I want you on our team. And I was like, no, absolutely not. I'm not joining the production team. That's not happening. So I ended up joining the production team because God checked me, and the production team and now at this point is my key serve. I serve with production, I work in our cafe. Um I serve on the baptism team and I work with the events team. But production is my key. That's where I spend most of my time. And it's the one I enjoy doing the most. I love being on the production team. I wouldn't say I like producing service. I don't enjoy it. I don't not enjoy it, but I don't feel passionate about it. But I do enjoy the team and I enjoy the fact that I'm able to feed into them, they feed into me, and the team genuinely cares about each other. And I can see the difference I'm making for service every week. Obviously, if I wasn't there, someone else would be doing it, but we're making a big impact on how service happens every week because if no one was producing it, it wouldn't happen. So all of that happened, and I ended up, like I said, just really diving in and building that relationship with God because I saw these godly people and I saw what it meant to be a godly person. And I saw these people aren't perfect. These people are hurting. These people are learning, but they love God and God makes it okay. So I ended up really diving really hard in the church. I serve all the time. I serve more than I should. because I kind of ignore myself sometimes because I'm so focused on serving, which isn't good. You should find a balance. I'm just not a very good person for balancing things. But the things like that had went really smoothly, and then like I just hit a wall and I got really depressed again. And a lot of it, like me and the production, not the production director, me and the facilities director had some stuff going on. There was some conflict there, and we ended up getting in a fight one night. Like, uh, not a fight. We had a verbal altercation. He doesn't consider it an argument, but I was livid. It was an argument. He just doesn't know it was. But and I got really depressed again. And I was contemplating very seriously taking my own life at that point again. And I went to the production intern, and he talked me off the cliff, but he didn't really know what to do. So, and I don't fault him for doing this. He did the right thing, but he went to our production director and was like, "Hey, this is what's going on." And so we had an event we were at, and after the event, my production director walked up to me and he was like, "Are you okay? Like, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Oh, everything's great. I'm perfect." And he went, "Are you sure about that?" And I was like, "Yeah, everything's perfect. No problem." And then he looked at me and he goes, "I know that's a lie." And he was like, "We are going to talk about this, and we can either talk about it now, or we can stand here and stare at each other until you are gonna talk about it." So we talked about it. And one of the mindsets that like I was bringing up was he was making the point that like one person should not have this much power over you. That you get in a fight with one person and you're just like, okay, like you're not gonna be here anymore. Like that's not okay. And two, I was like, if I'm gone, no one's gonna notice. And even if they do notice, like people pass on all the time. Like you get over it. You'll be upset, but you'll get over it. And he was talking about how you don't get over that. He was like, I would never get over that because for the rest of my life, like I would always think, like, what could I have done differently to make him still be here? And he was like, and honestly, God has a purpose for your life. And he was like, I want to see what that purpose is. And I know you want to see what that purpose is. And this was like a 3-hour conversation. We ended up leaving the church well after midnight. And like to not only see like he genuinely cared that much to stay up that late, and we had been at the church all day, to stay at the church that much longer because he cared about me. That was kind of like a game changer in my faith. And through that conversation and everything else that had happened before that, I kind of got the, give it to God mindset, and it kind of made sense at that point. And then like I got to the point where like people ask me now and be like, why do things not bother you? Like why are you okay when things are like falling apart? And I'm like, honestly, when you put God first and when you give it all to God, you realize what matters and what doesn't. And if it doesn't matter, then what's the point in stressing over it? What's the point in it bothering you? Because God's got that. Like he's a big boy, like he can handle that. And there's no reason for me to stress over it because God has it. And it's not that big of a deal. If it's about like people's salvation, if it's about people struggling, that matters. If it's about a minor inconvenience in my life, that doesn't matter. I'll get over it. It'll be fine. Um, and then kind of the last part of it actually happened last week. It happened a week ago today. Um, we're in the middle, but we're not in the middle. We finished today a 3-week fast. and we had a prayer service every morning. And last Saturday, I went to my campus and went to the prayer service, and I forgot about it, but we had a conference at my campus, at my church campus this past Saturday. And for the conference across not all of the campuses, because they had the conference in some of the satellite campuses too, but all of the campuses in this area met, all of the college students met at my campus, and they had a conference there all day. And I wasn't there all day for it because I was on my lunch break. I take my lunch break, go to prayer, then go back to work. But I went to the prayer that morning, and typically, like, I'm a front row person. Every Sunday, every event, I sit beside my pastor on the front row. But this day, like, something was like, no, you need to sit in the back. So I sat in the back of our auditorium, and our auditorium is like, it has like the ground floor, and all the seats go back. And then there's the production booth, and behind the production booth, um, there's like stairways that go up, and the seating goes up the wall in the back. So I went in the back, and I was sitting up at the top of one of those stairway areas. And so we started worship, and I was watching, and I just saw like how on fire and how passionate the college students were for God, and how much they needed God and how much they loved God, and I couldn't worship. I was literally like on the floor bawling because I was so overwhelmed with the presence of God. And we ended worship, we got into prayer. I couldn't even pray. Like, I was so overwhelmed with the presence of God the entire time I was there. I was just on the floor crying. And that's kind of when I learned what what my calling was, because I'd been praying throughout the whole fast. I'd been praying about that. I'd been praying like, God, show me what my calling is. And not only show me what my calling is, but give me the strength to listen to you when you do show me what my calling is. And that day, he showed me what my calling was and showed me that I want to work with college ministry, and I want to, connect with those people, because not only, I think that's such like a key portion of ministry, because when you have like the younger people, like, they're there because their parents are there. They're going to be there either way. Not to say that it's not important to reach those people, but whether they feel connected, whether they feel seen, whether they feel needed, they're going to be there next week because they're coming there with their parents. And a lot of the time with adult ministry, like, as an adult, like, your brain's going to work differently, and you're going to interact with those people differently, and you're going to like see the value in what you're doing. But with those people in the middle, like, they don't, if you don't get them connected and you don't get them to feel seen, to feel acknowledged, and to get excited about God, they're not going to stay. They're going to walk away. And if they walk away, they might not walk into church another time for the rest of their life. And if you're not like making that effort and getting them excited and making them feel seen and making them feel heard, that might be their salvation that was lost because of something that we could have done better as the church. And not only that, but about sin specifically, like with my sin, I felt like I didn't belong in the church because a lot of the time churches act like my sin is worse or different than other churches. And a lot of churches are like, oh, we'll love you once you're straight. And I don't want another young adult to walk into a church that I am a part of and not feel seen, not feel loved, not feel wanted in that church because they sin differently than um as accept as quote unquote acceptable to sin.
Yeah, I mean,
And yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a really great message to take home. I love the calling that, you found through this journey, like this journey that God has sent you through, that he's been right along with you the whole time. It's amazing how you can see instances of his hand and his providence in there, sending the right people to you at the right time and getting you in and out of situations when it's needed the most, and how he's worked with you in the past however many months, how like even this past week. It's incredible to see like what God has done through you and where he's leading you now. um I really want to thank you for sharing that. Honestly, I think that message is going to be a huge help to anybody who's listening to this who might see this in the future. It's a message that we need to hear more. I mean, it's exactly what you said at the end, right? There's all these churches out there who for some reason will pretend that a sin like this is somehow worse than any other sin, and people who commit it just can't come to these services. They're not allowed in to hear the word of God, as if the people who are saying this don't have sins of their own that they struggle with, right? And the fact that you have this calling to let those people be heard in the ministry setting today, we really need that. We really, really need that kind of a message today. And I think it's great that you're going to be pursuing that. Um, I want to preface real quick, if there's anybody in chat, we're gonna like if you have any questions, comments, anything, now's your time to put them out there. We've got a little bit of time. We want to take any of those, but while we've got those coming into chat, if there's going to be any of those, I actually have maybe a question or two of my own. So the first one I want to ask, I guess, is essentially, is there any advice that you could give to anybody who's watching this who might be struggling through some similar things that you've struggled with on your journey? Is there any advice that you could give them that might comfort them or help them out in some way? I don't know if you have anything on your heart right now or anything that comes to mind, but I don't know. What do you think?
I'd say like the biggest thing to remember is like no matter what your sin is, no matter what you're struggling with, God doesn't view any sin as worse or better than any other. Like being attracted to like someone of the same sex is viewed no differently from God than lying, than being prideful. The Bible says there is one sin that is above other sins, and that is committing blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. If you're not doing that, God doesn't view your sin as differently. And I mean, a lot of that is because, like, there's a lot of sins out there. And for the most part, like, it's things that you really have to fight doing. It's not that hard to not commit blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. But, like, if God sees you trying to be better, like, no matter how many times you fail, no matter how many bad decisions you make, God still loves you. Jesus still died on the cross for you. Um, John 3:16 says that he died on the cross for all. But I think that's the most important distinction that you need to make if you're going to find peace is for all means for you.
Hmm.
Like, yes, Jesus died on the cross for all of us, but he specifically died on the cross for me. He specifically died on the cross for Logan. He specifically died on the cross for each one of us individually, not as a collective.
Hmm. Yeah, and absolutely, and I would want to add to that as well the fact that he died for us while we were yet sinners, right? Like there's nothing that we could have possibly done to save ourselves. He did that knowing we were dead to sin, so that he loved us that much, even though we were dead to sin, to bring us back. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's a conscious effort to be better, right? Like we all have certain sins that we struggle with, that we work on, and exactly what you said, it's not that one is better or worse than the other. It's they're all equal in God's eyes, right? And we should treat it that way.
And that's one important thing about love too. I always point this out, and I don't want to speak for Jesus because I'm not Jesus. But I have to imagine that although Jesus is all love and everything he has encompasses love, I feel like if Jesus is capable of hate, the one thing that he would hate would be sin. Not sinners, important distinction, but sin. And when he died on that cross, he died to eradicate sin. So, like, that tells me that as much as I imagine that Jesus hates sin, he loves me more than he hates that sin.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you've kind of prefaced where you see your calling going, right? Um, and we've talked about this a little bit, but for the sake of people watching, what do you think are going to be some of the things that you do to pursue that going forward?
Um, so right now, this past week I decided to be part of the college ministry. Inherently I was gonna start serving on it, but right now I'm just gonna experience it. Um, because I'm not good at that, and I think it's important to feed into myself as much as it is to feed into other people, and I can still feed into those people as someone who's experiencing the ministry, by just interacting with the people around me. And then on top of that, in this fall semester, I'm gonna start attending Bible college to start to get my foot in the door to eventually work in full-time ministry.
Nice, nice. That's awesome. We need as many ministers as we can get in this time and day.
Definitely.
Yeah, especially you know, the where we live at with we could always use more, that's for sure. Well, I mean, I'll doesn't seem like we have many questions from chat, and that's okay. That's okay. You know, your testimony is enough, and I'm sure we've had some people come through. I'm sure it's gotten out there. You know, God wanted this to happen for a reason. You know, he put this on my heart to kind of get this going, and I think a lot of that came through what you would say whenever you'd come through chat. I think God was absolutely working through you when you came through and said a lot of the things that you did. Um, and I'm sure that he's worked through this to help people beyond our own imagination. Oh, wow, we have one person. Do you have any quick questions or comments or anything before we end this off? Otherwise, I mean, I, I I don't have any more questions myself, and yeah, I guess that seems good over there too. Do you mind if I pray us out real quick?
Not at all. Go for it.
Sweet. All right. Father in heaven, I thank you so much for this time that we had to chat, to be able to hear Zev's story, his testimony, how you've worked through his life, the providences that you have shown in his life, the people that you gave him when he needed them the most, the situations that you got him out of when he needed to get out of them, and the people that you've put in his life to really help him out and to help him along this journey and to speak your will and your words to him. I thank you so much for this amazing calling that you've put on his life, and I pray that you will be with him, that he can be on fire for you, and be able to help out many, many more people, that you can work through him and his ministry moving forward. Thank you so much for everybody who showed up to this and who will watch this in the future, that they might gain something out of this, that they might be able to come closer to you, maybe hear something that you're calling them to be hearing, to be doing. I want everybody to be able to hear from this that they're loved by you, regardless of who they are, what they struggle with, that that you love each of us equally, that we're all your children, and that you want all of us to come back to you. For all these things in your name, amen. All right, sweet. Well, I think I'll call that here then. Thank you so much
All right.
for coming on, man. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you coming out and telling your story. I know it might have been hard for you to maybe say some of those things, especially publicly. But I really appreciate what you've done here. And I know God's used this. I know that God has been and will be using this. So I really appreciate you coming, man. Any last things you want to say before I end it?
Just tell your story, share your story. That's why God gave it to us, is to share our stories, because it's not our story, it's God's story. This is what God allowed to happen in our lives and what God wanted to happen in our lives, and He gave us the story because He wants us to use it to change other lives going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. All right. Well, monophobiac, if that's how you say that. Sorry. I'm glad you were here to listen in on this. If you want to come back, we're going to be next week. We're going to be going into Genesis 3. We're going to be talking about the fall, maybe playing some games. I'm not sure what we'll be playing yet. Maybe Minecraft or something to play in the background. Tuesday, I think I'll be doing a stream as well. That one won't be necessarily Bible centered. It'll be more just to come have a good time and play some games. So if you want to come back for any of those, I'd appreciate you coming. But otherwise, I'm glad you were here to hear this testimony. And yeah, I think I'm gonna call it there.
Are
Thanks for
you
coming in.
calling it? Calling it?
Yeah, I'm calling it this time, I think.
All right.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll see you around.